Sarafina. Is that did I say that right? Is that the right way to say it? Okay.
Yeah.
I always I only read it, so I don't know the right way to say it. Sarafina. It comes out tomorrow when this drops. It'll be out tomorrow. Go ahead.
In the book. Oh, when this
Yeah,
podcast
we're in
drops,
the we'll be
yes,
we're in the
April 7th.
future. We're in the
Yes.
future. Yeah, April
Yes.
7th, but it'll come out tomorrow. Or if you're listening the day after this drops, then it's out.
Yeah. Right on.
And you should go buy it. You should go read it, dear listener, because it's an incredible read. Brutal and beautiful is my two
Thank you.
adjectives for it.
Thank you.
I mean, it is both of those things in equal measure, I would say. Before I jump into questions, can you give our listeners like a elevator pitch for Sarafina?
Yeah, so Sarafina is a book about three brothers who are fighting for the Confederate Army during the American Civil War. And during the Battle of Shiloh, which I've written about before in my novella Shiloh, which is a particularly bloody battle in the Civil War, these three brothers decide that they've seen enough and they're going to go AWOL and make their way back to home, which is in Natchez, Mississippi, which from Shiloh, Tennessee to Natchez, Mississippi is quite the trek, especially in 1862 when there was really no development of that land outside of whatever what the Native Americans had done at that time. So there was no modern facilities, no roads, that kind of stuff. So they're basically trekking through wilderness to try and get home, and they're being chased by the home guard, who are who if they catch them will probably execute them. There are bandits on the way, and they and there's like lack of food, and so they get to a point, these three brothers, where they are injured and starving and desperate and potentially on death's door. And then, like a miracle, they've come across this homestead in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the wilderness. And in this homestead live a young boy and a young woman and a child, basically. So the woman is Sarafina and her child is Titus. And they take the brothers in and they take care of them. And that's kind of when the real horror starts. Anything else I would tell you would be a spoiler.
Exactly. It is like there are layers and layers and layers. You just keep digging into the book as it goes further and further, and it's like you don't really get hints of any of that stuff early on. It's just this journey.
Yeah, I would say the first quarter of the book, maybe I'm guesstimating, is it probably it's more like survival horror, and probably is a little bit more, to kind of world build and get the reader sort of immersed in what this world is like and what it was like for these three brothers and some of their history and past. And then once they get to the cabin, the homestead in the woods, it kind of becomes a bit of a different story for sure. And then to your point,
again, and then it happens again, and then it happens again. Which I love that. I mean, it's like every part of it is still very compelling. I was like, oh, this is they're on the run. I don't know. I think this is my first question is connected to the fact that, they're Confederate soldiers.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like immediately you're like, it feels like you're on a back foot with a protagonist when they're like, oh, they fight for the Confederacy. They're proud Southerners. Yeah. And Ethan is our main POV, who is the youngest and theoretically the most innocent of these brothers.
Right.
But Ethan even is quickly like, oh, both my brothers might be bad people. Like they are vicious, dark men.
Yes.
And like, was there, as you're working through the story, and like it becomes a major theme of the book, of evil, the nature of evil, and of what is that? Was there a push-pull of like, as we're writing with these protagonists who might be bad people, was there ever a question in your mind about, well, I need to feather that, I don't want to have a reader hate my protagonist? Or was it, well, no, I know that these are who these people are, I have to be honest with the reader?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that has come up with a few of my books, which is that I'm not really, um, I tend to go my own way when it comes to writing my characters, and I've gotten pushback on that from editors and from publishers and from readers. Like that, like if you take Gothic, my novel Gothic, for example, has a very unlikable protagonist, if you will, but that's very purposeful, and and I think with this book, yes, there was definitely pushback from the publisher about making these characters more politically correct, making them a little bit more modern thinking, and I'm like, these are this main character is a 17-year-old who grew up in Natchez, Mississippi in 1860s and is fighting for the Confederate Army. He has a very specific perspective of the world, and in a very I would say a skewed perspective of more morality and right and wrong, and so so yeah, so the three brothers are, but I do try and like Ethan is very innocent. He's only a kid. He's 17 years old.
Yeah.
And I do try, I did want Ethan to be, and I want all my characters to always be, yes, they're morally gray in all my books for the most part. Even my heroes have their moments of, where they do the wrong thing, and I think that's part of what makes characters interesting, is because if you're really writing people as they are, then they're flawed, because none of us are perfect, and we all have our dark side, and we all make mistakes. And I think if you look back on things that you did when you were 17 versus things you do when you're 47, you're going to be like, what was I even what was I thinking? And I think there's some of that wrapped up in the book. So I guess for me, with Ethan in particular, was I wanted to make sure that I got across his innocence, maybe his almost naivety, his desire to be included, his kind of like Me Too attitude when it comes to his older brothers, his desire to be loved by them and accepted by them and by his father, and you learn about his father and their relationship, which I think comes into play with Ethan, and why he is the way he is, and his twin sister Ellie comes into play. So he's a very complicated character, and I think as the layers reveal themselves throughout the book, he ends up becoming I would hope that even a more complicated character than people probably assume when you first meet him.
I like Ethan a lot. Even though sometimes I really don't like Ethan, but that's the whole but
Yeah.
that's it. Like it
Yeah.
I don't know, it feels like there is a the return to like the theme about socialization of boys and boys turning into men, the coming of age thing of what makes a boy into a man, and how can that go wrong, or how does it
Yeah.
go wrong?
Especially when you're talking about in a time of war, when
Yeah.
you're talking about throwing these kids, and you can probably put it with any, whether it be Civil War or World War I or present day. I think there's something about that jarring loss of innocence that comes with throwing a young person into a situation where they have to kill or be killed. And that was kind of one of the things I wanted to get across in the book was the trauma of him basically being put in this situation as a 17-year-old kid who wasn't even, and I make a comment in the book at some point where it's like he wasn't even allowed to run like the tobacco shop, but now he's being asked to kill men and for his country. And so I think and I wanted to really get across the trauma of that.
Achieved.
Part of,
You succeeded.
yeah. Thank you. And then when you get into when I start revealing more and more about his character and the character of the other people in the book, I think it becomes the complexity of who he is. I think was for me, a fascinating case study to write about, and I think that's kind of one of the things I always look at when I write a book, like even the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, Rose Dubois is my main character and my main protagonist in that book, and she's a 72-year-old, woman, but I really latched on to her characters, and I wanted to make her surprising to readers. I wanted to make her complex. I wanted to give her a history that was dark and formative. And so I think with Ethan it was kind of the same way. I always kind of find like for me, when I dig into a new story that I want to tell, yes, I want to tell the story. Here's the plot. Here's the beats. Here's what's going to happen. Here's all the scary stuff. Here's all the supernatural stuff. But for me, as a writer, what really hooks me is the characters, and how can I, that's what excites me, is writing about these really complex, deep, morally gray characters, and I find it fascinating to dig into their psyches, and that's what I get. That's the exciting part for me as a writer, and then I have fun writing all the scary stuff too, and all the violent stuff and whatever. But for me, what is attractive is creating a character that will really resonate.
I think this leads into the next question I had for you, was like the ideas in this book and a lot of your work are like, again, I mentioned evil, the nature of evil, and like where does that surface in a person? Is it like there, or the like, I don't know, there is something that's a spoiler on, and like I'm not gonna give any details about it, but there is a mention of like badness versus I wasn't evil, I was bad, and I'm like. Is there and I guess the delineation in people's minds about what, I'm not evil, I'm just this, I'm not, and there's these big ideas in this book, and a lot of them connecting back to religion. Are those themes present from the beginning when you're working it? You say you're trying to explore that character. Do they surface from following Ethan's story, or is it, I know these themes are going to be there, how do I bring them out alongside my character?
It's a really good question. I for this book in particular, no, I think the themes evolved with the book. I didn't have. This was a book that I owed a book to Tor, okay, and I'd given them 2 complete novels, and then my agent was like, I think we should add like a third option, like maybe more straight down the middle, kind of classic horror. And I was like, okay. So I wrote like a couple paragraphs, and it was called Brothers, and it was these 3 brothers, blah blah blah. What basically the synopsis of this book, and that was the one that Tor wanted. So I created an outline for the story, and I presented them the outline, and they accepted the outline, and so. It really was kind of a thing that I was hadn't really given too much thought about until I was sort of like in the soup, as it were. And I think what happened was Tor wanted me to make some changes I wasn't comfortable making, so I took it to I took that away, and I gave them a different book, and I took this book to Clash, and I think so. I think it evolved. I had like this core idea. About these brothers, and I really wanted to. My thinking at the time was, I really want to get into the relationship between these siblings, and kind of the complexities of having older brothers and younger brothers, and sort of that push and pull, and that kind of rough, kind of tumble love, and then as I got into more of the story, to your point, I started thinking more about these larger themes, and exploring like the nature of evil. And so it was definitely an evolution with this telling. And I didn't have, even though I had the book completely outlined, there were a lot of things that I ended up changing when I got into the writing process, because I wanted to go. For one thing, I always want to subvert expectations of a reader, but for another thing, I also wanted to explore something I wasn't, to your point exactly, I wasn't really thinking about initially. And so I was like, well, if I really want to explore the nature of evil, then I need to kind of like shift the way I'm thinking about this book and this telling this story. So that was all stuff that kind of came as I was going. And it was a fascinating process, and I really enjoyed writing this book. It was a lot of work because it is historical fiction. You kind of feel like you're writing a book report every other page, but
as someone who is revising historical fiction,
you don't realize how much stuff you don't know, and or how would they do that, or what kind of, and so it was, I would say it evolved as I wrote, and then I really wanted to lean into those themes, and created some. And so, yeah, it created some avenues I was not expecting that surprised me, even as the writer.
Right. It starts there. I mean, it never. I don't think it ever really leaves the brothers, especially leaves Ethan and his relationship with his brothers. It feels like it's always in a connection to that, and then to his sister and to his dad. But
Yeah, there's some
it feels like
cutaways to
yeah,
the
but it
sister.
feels like the spider web out from them connects to these greater systems of country and patriotism, even if it's nationalism to just the South, or
Right.
to religion, or to some ideal of masculinity.
Yeah, and I think and I think that was one of the things that was really interesting, was exactly which was taking that idea of masculinity and turning it on its, and kind of putting it into a blender in a way, right? And sort of seeing like how they would respond to that being challenged. Their sense of honor and their sense of masculinity and their like bravado being challenged in a certain way, and that's kind of one of the things that made the the Sarafina part of the book, we'll call it, the last 2/3 of the
Yeah.
book, kind of interesting, because I really enjoyed playing with those themes and having that clash of ideals, and almost like and even them kind of realizing that even they didn't really understand what true evil looked like. Um, and to your point, you mentioned earlier about, I was bad, but I'm not evil, but I just did something bad. And I thought, that denial, that self denial was such an interesting thing to explore as well. Which is like how one could go through life being a certain way, and sort of almost like blocking it out.
And cognitive
Like,
dissonance of it.
yeah, cognitive, exactly. And just like being like, hey, I'm a good guy. Like, just because I did X, Y, and Z doesn't make me a bad person. And it's that almost desperation, like I said earlier, to be accepted, and almost that desperation to be like, to feel that you're a good person. And then as that slowly maybe unveiled that maybe you're not the person you thought you were. So all these like character themes were really fascinating for me as a writer to dig into and explore, and kind of like tear apart and dissect, and find, and like I said, sort of put this idea of masculinity into a blender, and just sort of like kind of see how these guys would react to it was a lot of fun for me. And it made Serafina a lot of fun to write.
Yeah,
as well.
she is great. I love
Yeah,
her.
she's got her issues too.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's what you said. You started off, you're like, an interesting character is a flawed character, and I'm like, yeah, you can't. I don't want anyone to be perfect. That's boring. It's not interesting at all.
Yeah.
They have to have issues.
Yeah, and I think the difference is, I think for writers listening out there, because I've had this conversation ad nauseum with other writers and with editors or on panels or what have you, and I think the idea of a likable character, and I always come back to, I don't think the character has to be likable. I think they have to be relatable.
Yeah.
The whole point of having a likable quote unquote character is that you want the reader to connect to the character, and therefore they are more engrossed into what's happening to that character. You're involving the reader with the story and the themes of the story, and so that's why people say, "Oh, your characters have to be likable," but they don't really mean. But it's actually the wrong word. And if you're writing characters that are likable, like you really want everyone to like them, you're gonna probably fail. I'm sorry to say, because nobody likes everybody, and
No.
and you're gonna find somebody who. And I've run into that myself with characters. Like, there are characters that I've written in books that I was like, this character needs to be universally liked. And I was, pretty surprised when I would read reviews of that book and be like, people were like, I hated this character so much. And it's true. And so I think the point is that you have to make characters relatable. And you have to, because readers need to be able to empathize with the character, and they need to be able to understand the character's motivations. So if you may not like Tyson Parks in Gothic, you may not like Ethan in Serafina, but you understand why they're doing what they're doing, and
Yeah.
you understand why they're making the choices they're making. You don't agree with them, and you don't like them. And you may not like them as characters, but you get it. And I think that's kind of what makes. I think that's what people need as writers need to focus on more versus like they need to be universally liked.
Yeah. I
Like
mean,
you're not
it's the
otherwise
question.
you're gonna do that. Just write a book full of Elmos.
They need to be compelling. They need to be. I always like. I didn't like them, but I found them very compelling. Like Archie and Mason are both bad people. I like
Yes.
pretty. Almost from the get go, you're like, these are hard, awful men. But then you're
Right.
like, the more you learn, you're like, well, and I'm still very compelled by them. I'm like, and like, it's that connection to you find those moments you connect to their humanity where you're like, well, they care about their brother,
Right.
and like I care about my sister. Like it's those kind of core things, and like we've all, I don't know. There's a moment where, and I think it's also some of it's just your skill as a writer where you are able to be like make me care about a man who is suffering and he's trying to survive and he's as hard as nails and can nearly drown to death in a
Yeah.
a sucking awful swamp, and you're like, I don't want him to die. I want them to all live, even though they're bad.
Yeah, there's something about yeah, and that scene in particular that you're talking about, which is in the swamp, is was a really pivotal scene in the story because basically what I was saying. This is a moment, and I'll let readers discover for themselves. But there's a moment that happens at the end of that sequence that was very powerful to me as a writer because I was like, this is kind of the moment I want people to like sort of think about as we move into the rest of the story, and it's interesting because you can take a character and you can make him this, you can make them this, whatever dark, you know, brooding, grizzled, blowing people's heads off or whatever you want to, making them really hard to like and come off as this sort of like kind of this character that you sort of like immediately as a reader, you're like, okay, I know what this character is. He's going to be this person, or she's going to be this, and now I know it's in my head. I got it. I got the trope. I got it. And then like 30 pages later, I show you a different side of that character because it's a different moment. He's with a different now he's dealing with one of his brothers, or he's and all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a minute. Yeah, to your point, it's like, well, this is a real person. This is a guy who has complexity and who is flesh and blood in a way. And to your point, which is exactly the wonderful thing here, is like, well, wait a minute, I don't want this guy to die this way. And whereas like 20 pages ago you were like, good riddance. So I think it's important to always be revealing layers of your characters and revealing different sides of them because to make them human. Because because I think that's for me. I would never want a character to be completely just two-dimensional, and I would always want them to be sort of complex and morally gray, like I said. But because I think that's what makes it interesting for readers is to discover these kind of people and to also empathize with them, connect with them, and understand them, like I said. So those are all reasons that I do the things I do with the characters in my books. And sometimes I'm not as worried about it. It depends on the story I'm trying to tell. This story was very much rooted in characterization, much more so probably than I would argue than maybe any of my other books outside of maybe Boys in the Valley. But even that I would say no. I would say this is much because you are with these. It's a very small stage in a way. I mean, it's a big stage, but in a way, it's a small stage because you're dealing with the same three or four characters for a good chunk of the book, and so I really needed you to want to be with them and want to understand them. And then I think also it makes the second half of the book all that more interesting because now you're kind of like now these guys, and you're kind of like, well, oh, this is I can't wait to see how Mason reacts to what Sarafina does here.
Yeah, I kind of saw what you were building as you're going. I'm like, oh, and then I saw these you see all these moving parts, and I'm just like, oh, and I think it's like literally you just filled like a playground with all these like little tiny interesting toys, and they all clash in interesting ways. And I read this I think in two sittings. I was really captivated. My final question before we move on to the next segment, which might not be a little question at all. Um, you've already mentioned the big themes in this thing. How much fine tuning of that are you doing in revisions? In like after that first draft is the layering of like, oh well, now I have written a version of this story and I've introduced these first, the smaller themes that are connected with just to Ethan, and then as the world expands, these bigger themes of religion and evil and systems and all that stuff, and neutral. What is neutrality even? How much of that do you feather back and forth, if at all?
Yeah, I would say most of that is done in the first draft.
Okay.
The first drafts of my novels are pretty. I pretty much have told the story I want to tell. So I think with me, a second draft is really more focused on the writing itself. It's more the prose. It's more like I want to, like I'm agonizing over every sentence, trying to make sure I'm telling things the right way, trying to make sure that it reads the way I want to read it, the way I want it to be read. That it's beautiful when it needs to be beautiful, that it's visceral when it needs to be visceral. That it's scary when it needs to be scary. So a lot of that comes out. A lot of that stuff is less about what's happening in the story, and a lot of it is about how it's written. So I do focus a lot on the writing in my second drafts, and then So I would say I have most of this. The story is pretty much the story in my first drafts, and I think the second draft. Sometimes the second drafts are a little bit more heavy lifting, like with Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. The second draft of that was, or I would say the third draft of that. I would say the second draft was exactly what I just said. It was really going through the writing. But then the third draft, after the editor had given me their thoughts, it became kind of like, it wasn't so much the themes or anything like that. It was more of making it, like I was shaping it more into a kind of a whodunit versus like a straight thriller.
Right.
And so that kind of changed a little bit of the tone throughout and the way I was telling it. So that was interesting for me. I'd never gone through that process before, but I really enjoyed that process. It was a lot of work, but it was very gratifying. And then I think with Sarafina, once as I was going through and exploring these themes and they were kind of like working that clay. Once I was done with that first draft, it was pretty much. It was much darker than the book the book that you read, honestly, which I know sounds kind of.
I was gonna say this, but I feel like this cover also belies how brutal this book gets at times.
Yeah.
Very hard.
They leaned into the kind of the more like folkloric nature of the story,
it is there,
cool.
But it's also like really, really hard at times.
Yeah, it comes hard. Yeah. This is probably, in a lot of ways, at least in my personal opinion, probably the most. I would say it's probably the. I don't want to say it's the scariest of my books, but for me, it was probably like. I'd like to your point, like the most. I don't know. Yeah, I guess harder is the only way to put it. Like it goes harder than probably any of my other novels, and that includes like Gothic, which goes pretty hard. So I think, when everything was pretty much done with that first draft. Second draft for the Sarafina was all about sweetening the prose, really making it come to life. I really wanted to, I can already tell you I'm gonna get a lot of reviews for this book where people are upset about how slow a burn it is for the first half, but which is fine because that was very purposeful, so I don't mind that. It's not even a criticism to me. But because I really wanted to get people immersed in this world, and it wasn't just about the characters. It's about you're talking about trying to make sure they you understand. So when these brothers arrive on Serafina's doorstep, you understand. You feel their desperation. You feel they're like on their last legs. You've gone through this journey with them. We're all kind of exhausted, and so I think when you get to this next stage of the book, it kind of becomes like this. I don't know. It becomes this sort of like it just becomes a complete, like you're like exhilarated because now you're like, okay, well, wait, now we're getting into a whole different kind of story, which is fun. But I think you need all that to make this second part work. So, but yeah, no, I think like I said, I think I think all the themes I explore are explored. Second drafts are all about sweetening, and then for honestly, most of my books, I would say outside of maybe definitely Autumn Springs and Third Rule of Time Travel, which was a lot of editing work because it was such a complex story to tell, with the science and the time travel elements and everything, kind of make sure it was all done right. That those two were probably more heavy lifting on the back end, but for the most part, when I have gone through a second draft of a novel, it's pretty much done. I don't really do after that. It goes to the publisher or the editor. So my first drafts are pretty clean, and then my second drafts are pretty much what's in the book, and then from there I'm just doing proofing and maybe adding some stuff if the editors want more characterization here or things like that. But yeah, my second drafts are pretty much the book.
I'm always so intrigued by different authors and how they, because especially when books do have like, I don't know, it feels like this book does it like, I don't know, with all the kind of shades of gray that it explores.
Mm-hmm.
There's I don't know, it feels like I just in my own head I'd be like, I'd worry about, I don't want to give a reader a wrong impression, but honestly that's probably the point. The reader has to make their own. The reader has to draw their own conclusions about who Ethan is and what kind of man Ethan is and what kind of man or Ellie or even their dad, who for a period of the book I actually hated their father more than anyone else in this book. I really didn't like him at all.
Or even the priest. I mean,
or the priest. Good. That's also a good point.
Yeah, and I mean, you could go down the list. There's really nobody you can put a pin in, and I think, I think with a lot of times, for me anyway, I'm never, and you said it really well. I'm never really. My job is not to tell the reader what to feel.
Right.
My job is not to tell the reader what to think about this character. And I think sometimes readers assume that I'm trying to tell them something, and I'm really not. I'm asking them something. Yeah. All my books are questions. They're not statements in that way. You know what I mean? And it's like I'm just presenting the evidence. I'm not necessarily telling you the solution.
Not a value judgment.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes some reviewers or whatever, I'll see like, this author's trying to do A, B, and C, or they're trying to shove this down my throat, or they're trying to make me think that. And I think for me, and I can only speak for myself, but I'm never really thinking that way when I'm writing a book or a character. I'm just basically presenting the character as they appear to me, and what judgments you make on them is up to you. So I think that's like for me, and I thought with Sarafina probably more than any of my other novels, I'm definitely like just kind of presenting this evidence to you as a reader and being like, I don't know, what do you think? You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, it worked for me. I like the
because it's really less. It's really more of that, and I think that's kind of what makes it. To your point from the very beginning is what is the nature of evil, is something that's fun to explore in this story because you. And I saw one reviewer who wrote a wonderful review of the novel who really got into a lot of the ideas of like that they found themselves thinking about the different characters and whether they like agreed with them or didn't agree with them and whether they would have done that or not done that or and I think that's really what's cool about writing a book like this because ultimately I'm writing to entertain. That's my number one goal with anything I write is I want to entertain the reader. And then all the themes and the complexities of character and the deeper stuff you can get into and drill down into if you want. But I'm always about entertaining first. But if I can create some thoughts, if I can emotionally stir the pot, then that's wonderful because to me that's sort of like secondary, but it's also super important. And I think that's what gives some books legs when it comes to like refining readership is people will be like, you gotta, you should really check this out. Like it's, or you should read it, or maybe down, hopefully a decade or decades from now, people will still be discovering these stories and debating these characters. That's always the dream.
Sarafina is out tomorrow, and you should all go buy it. Everyone listening should go buy and read Sarafina. I hardly suggest it. And it also, like, I'm a sucker just for like dark grizzled men. I like a dark grizzled man. So this.
Hey, what can I say? I like a dark grizzled man.
I like a dark grizzled man. This has a lot of them, and I liked it a lot. We'll move on to our second segment, the second act. Just broader bookish questions and writing questions. Maybe less treading heavily on evil. We'll see, though. It's not. We'll see. The first question is from my last guest, and I will ask you at the end of this segment for a question. Can you move a little bit to your left? There, perfect.
Sorry,
it's fine.
I move around a lot.
Everyone does it. I'll ask you for a question for our next guest at the end of this segment. It could be anything. Just so let it stew back there. So the my first question is from Tamika Thompson. Her question for you is: if you were forced to write a long series with one of your characters, which one would you be willing to spend that much time with?
It's kind of an interesting question because I'm writing a sequel to Gothic right now.
Oh, okay.
I'm 50, almost 60,000 words into that novel. And it's interesting for two reasons. One, because I'm writing a sequel, which I never thought I would do. And I'm writing a sequel to probably what is arguably my least popular book, which has confused a lot of people. But it was a world I wanted to get back to, and I had a story that I wanted to tell. And I don't really think about that stuff too much. It's more just like, I would, if I have a story I feel strongly enough about, then I want to tell it. And I had this really great idea for how to do a sequel to Gothic. So anyway, and then it's the reason it's even doubly interesting is because in the book there is a writer who is a very successful writer of a fantasy series of books, and her quandary as a character is that she's debating whether she's going to continue on the gravy train or whether she's going to write what she really wants to write. And so that's interesting that question comes in. I was literally just writing about this exact thing last night, but in the shape of this character who's thinking about it. So that said, if I were to write, but I don't know, I think if I were to, I don't think any of my books work as series because in most of my books, everybody, dies.
Yeah.
There's very few survivors.
It's always the problem.
And I've had some meetings with film executives and things like that. We're like, do you think you could do a season 2? And I'm like, wow, everyone's dead at the end. But I don't know. So I would say this. I think if I were to do it, there is a book I have coming out next summer from Union Square, Hachette, here in the United States. Called The Blue Butterfly, and it is a mystery thriller. And I actually pitched that book as a trilogy. So I do have 2 more follow-up ideas, and I like the idea of that book being a trilogy. And I had kind of this arc that the main characters would go on. So I would say The Blue Butterfly would be my answer. That would be the book that I would want to do multiple sequels of. Okay. And I can't really think of any other titles that I would do that for.
All right.
A lot of people want a sequel to Child Alone with Strangers, so that might happen at some point, but we'll see.
Okay. It's always, people want it. Do I want it?
Right. And I do want it. I just don't know what it would be, but I have too many other things I have to think about. But
you'll figure it out.
I could see it happening at some point.
It'll stew. A question I ask everyone is, who's a writer more people should be reading? And you can give me multiple answers if you want to.
I always start with Laird Barron, who I think is a Generational writer of horror. And Laird was the one
truly transcendental change.
Yeah, and he's the guy who brought me to horror, and both as a writer and as a friend, and was a mentor of mine for a long time, and we're still obviously friends. But he's been going through a lot of health issues. But Laird is a wonderful, wonderful writer, and what's really cool about reading Laird's work is that and this is what really got me thinking that I would make this around 2014 or so, I decided to make the switch from focusing on non-genre fiction, which I had already written 100 short stories, 3 novels. None of it ever got published for the most part. And then, but when I read Laird's collection, The Beautiful Thing That Awaits Us All, I was like, I realized how you could use prose to transcend the medium, and how you could do things with prose that I never knew you could do, and that's what got me excited about trying it. And so that's what kind of got me into writing horror. And even though I've been writing horror movies for a bit at that point, so as screenwriter, so yeah, I always say Laird. He's a, you should definitely read his early work and his trilogy from Putnam. And other writers that you could be, I really enjoyed Chris Panettire's newest novel.
Yeah, he was on the podcast.
Oh, he was, okay.
3 weeks ago about Daytide's crazy. I loved it.
Yeah,
I loved that book so much.
I wrote the introduction for that for him. So I really enjoyed the book. I'm trying to think who else off the top of my head, but those are 2 good ones. I think I wish more people like. See, most of the people that I read, people read, so it's like I don't know how like.
Well, I say this a lot to people. It's like a lot of times people hear a name 14 times, the 15th time is the time they go, oh, maybe I should read them.
I mean, I think Katrina Ward's doing really interesting work. I think she's someone that everybody should be reading, and I know she's very popular. Her last book was a USA Today bestseller that just came out, but she's a wonderful writer, and she's kind of a genius when it comes to plotting, and even though she doesn't outline, at least to the degree that I've spoken to her about certain specific books, so yeah, those are 3 writers right there that I think people could be reading more.
Those are good names. People should read those people. I agree with you. This is a question that I think is actually appropriate because I saw your social media post about how many words you've written.
Yeah.
Over 1 million words published.
I was surprised.
When you look back at your numbers and you're like, wow, I've written a lot of words. How and this is as much as you can recognize it. How has your writing changed since you first started writing, and how has it changed since you first started publishing?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because the impetus for that post that you're talking about, where I said, I've published over 1 million words, that's crazy, and is that I'm working on a 3-book set that is a 10-year retrospective called Decade of Darkness that hasn't been announced yet, so I won't say who the publisher is, I guess, but I'm working on this big project, and it's basically everything I wrote from 2014 to 2024, not including the novels, not including the 6 novels or whatever it was I wrote during that time. So, so it was really interesting for me to see, to see the word count. I was like, wow, that's a lot of words. And then, because it's over 500,000 words, this project, and then to see, to your point, kind of the way I've changed as a writer, or evolved as a writer, I would say. So I definitely have. So when I started writing when I was very, very young, and I've always written. So definitely my work has changed. I think the biggest part of evolution as a writer is finding your voice, discovering your voice. And I think what's been fascinating for me is that I have kind of discovered that I don't have a particular voice in a way, even though readers tell me differently. I read, like, if you were to read The Third Rule of Time Travel and then read Gothic, you might, and if I were to take my name off those books, you might not know that they were the same writer or the same author. And I think with all my books, I kind of approach it differently, and I always want to kind of like be in full service to the story, not just with the plot, but the way I'm writing it as well. The way I'm, like, Sarafina, by the way, is like very paced. The plot's much more dense. It's more like you're trudging kind of through this wilderness in a way, and then it kind of accelerates as you get to the later parts of the book. And there's things I do with, like, A Child Among Strangers, where I start in one sort of tense and then I switch at one point to like present tense, and so I don't know. So I really like playing with mechanics. I really like playing with prose. So I think those are things those are tools that I have sharpened as I've written more and more. And also, it's not just writing more and more. It's also going through the editing process with professional editors or publishers or readers who are giving you feedback. It's you learn so much. I mean, I'm like a sponge when it comes to that stuff, and it fascinates me to learn new things and to learn perspectives on things that I've done. And so I think it's just a matter of like trial and error in a way for decades that got me to this point, 10 years ago or whatever it was, where I was like, okay, I think I kind of now know what I'm doing. And then when I started publishing, because I actually started publishing right away. My first story was Mother, which I wrote in 2014, my first horror story. And the first publisher I sent it to bought it, which was done as Manor Press. And my second story was Alter, which was also done as Manor Press and was a chapbook that I got paid $25 for. But now it's going to be a movie by A24, right? So I just wanted to get the work out there. And so I think when I started publishing, I think the big thing for me was, I will say this, I think a lot more about what I'm writing. I will say this, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, I'm trying to phrase it the right way. I think a lot more about how what I'm writing will be read or perceived than I ever thought about when I first started. And I don't mean that as in like, oh, I hope people like this. I don't really think about that. It's more of a sensitivity issue. It's more of, am I being sensitive to this subject? Am I being sensitive to this type of a character? And I'm not necessarily saying that in a way where I'm like fretting about it. It's more of an awareness. I've grown as a writer, and I've also grown as a person over the last 10 or so years. And when you get a lot of feedback, you're kind of like, yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think that was kind of like maybe something I shouldn't have done, or I think I was not being. And I hate to use the word sensitive because it makes it sound like people are sensitive and that I'm sensitive, oversensitive, and I don't mean it that way. But I guess what I mean is aware. And I want to be very aware of what I'm writing is perceived the right way. It doesn't mean I'm going to make a bad decision for the story. It doesn't mean I'm going to do something I normally wouldn't necessarily want to do for the story. But it does mean I'm going to kind of look at it a little bit more. I'm going to pick it up and kind of like turn it around, a little bit more. And I'm going to sort of make sure I'm seeing from all the angles. And whether it's writing about ethnicities or writing about women or just the way I'm describing something, a scene of violence, or there's just a lot of things I think about now that I've grown to be more. And again, I hate to use words like sensitive or careful because that really gives the wrong vibe. It's really.
I mean, I think those are. I don't think those words are wrong. I just think that the modern connotation for them has changed what they mean when we say them. Even though I think in the classical sense of like, yes, I'm doing it with care. I am doing it with care. Yeah, I'm doing it with intent.
Yes, because where I come from is, like I said earlier, my number one job is to entertain. And I want to, don't get me wrong, I want to upset people.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to upset people. I want to bother you. I want to make you uncomfortable, but I want to do it in the right way. And I want to do it for the right reasons. And so I think that's kind of, I would say, if you're talking about growth as a writer, that's probably where I've had the most growth outside of maybe just like sharpening all the tools in my toolkit, as it were.
Yeah. I mean,
I think comes from trial and error. Right.
I think that there is a like that. I feel like is the common like, oh, I'm just better because I've written a lot more. Of course, yeah, that's most writers are like, oh, well, I've written more, I'm better at that. But it's also like I feel like I've been thinking a lot personally about intent, about like doing things with intent, and it means like literally does exactly what you're describing of like, why am I doing this specific thing, and like it can get down to minute word choices like. Is this the right word in this specific sentence for this exact meaning I'm trying to evoke, and digging down into those small things. And sometimes it is like, well, if you want to upset someone, you want to upset them in the way you want to upset them, not just in general. I don't want to wield a shotgun. I want to have a scalpel.
Yeah.
That kind of precision.
And I think it's still like, I think there is still, I still am always true to this. Like, I'm always in everything I do is in service to the story. That is like my tagline. Everything I do is in service to the story. But I also I'm also not going to write characters that are unbelievable because I'm worried that people will be offended by them.
Right.
And I've come across that where people are like, I'm so offended that about this. This character in this book was really offensive. I can't believe this author wrote this. I'm blacklisting this author. And it's like that is true to that character's. That is exactly what that character would say in that situation. And I think that's where I think there has to be understanding on both sides. It's like if I'm being honest, and it's necessary to tell the story, then that's what art is. It's honesty. Yes. And if you're telling me to be dishonest because it personally offends you, then that's kind of a you thing. That's not really a me thing. So I think that's kind of where. So it's a very nuanced conversation. But I will say, like I said, I find it. I'm a very curious guy by nature, and I'm very interested in sociology. I'm very interested in human interaction. I'm very interested in the human psyche, and I think, and so for me, it's been really exploring and learning and becoming more aware of a lot of things when it comes to how I present stuff. Has been a really interesting growth that I've gone through, and I still to this day find it fascinating and something I think about a lot.
I mean, being thoughtful is our job, I would say, really. And I don't know.
I think you can do it.
The bare minimum, really.
Yeah, I think there's a point where I think there are, like, if your point is to bludgeon, then that's your point. And if your art is bludgeoning, then that's your art. And I'm not judging that. And if your art is understanding or empathy, then you have to kind of think about that, maybe think about how you're presenting that.
Yeah. I mean, when you say it's fascinating, yeah, I could literally talk to you about this for like three more hours. But we are running. I will do, let's see. No, the podcast police are going to come arrest me if I keep this podcast going for too long. So I will just say, do you have a question for our next guest?
Oh yeah, that's right. So I don't know who the next guest is, so it has to be pretty general.
I can tell you if you'd like. I don't know if you know who they are, but it is Ellery Adams.
Ellery Adams. I don't know Ellery Adams, but let's see. A good question for. I'm on the spot. A good question for a writer. I should have millions of questions because I actually had a podcast about writing for like I told you for 24 episodes. I would say, because I know people like to hear about this, and I like to hear about it too, because I'm a big writer nerd, is I would say, what is your drafting process? Not your pantser versus plotter question, but what is your drafting process? Because I find that very fascinating, because I think a lot of writers have different drafting processes. And what I mean by that, for those listening or watching, is like, I mentioned to you my first draft. So if you read about how Joe Lansdale writes his first drafts, or if you read about how Paul Tremblay writes his first drafts, versus like Stephen Graham Jones or Josh Malerman or whoever, I think you'll find there's a lot of variance in how people
big differences,
how they think about their first draft versus how they think about their second draft and third drafts. And I was just talking to Joe Kaplan about this. We had an event at Barnes & Noble. She has a new book out called The Midnight Muse, and we were talking about vomit draft and what she does, what her draft process is in front of this group of people, and so it's always a subject that fascinates me. So I would say I would ask her what her draft process is.
So I also enjoy that a lot, so that's a great question, and one I might just steal and use forever now, which is I sometimes do that. We'll move on to the final segment, which is it's time for blood. It's time for struggle, for trouble. Be it nuts and bolts, philosophical questions about writing or ethos, questions with social media marketing or business, any of those problems. It could be any of those things. What do you have? What's on top of mind? Or you can just complain about something too if you want to.
Gosh, you're asking me to put my foot in the fire.
I don't want you don't necessarily have to talk about it if you think you're getting into trouble, but it is more about I think issues that all of us face, regardless of where you are. It could be something because of where you are in your career versus someone who's not regardless of what it is.
I'll just say I think there's a lot of and I think this has been touched on, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding between what happens on social media and what happens in the real world. And it sounds like an obvious statement, but let me make my point. My point is that I think it's like, I think when it comes, especially when it comes to writing careers, I think there is, because I'm a guy, for example, who tends to just, for the most part, I'm basically just posting like positive updates because that's kind of how I use social media. It's just like a way for me to be like, hey, this happened. I'm happy about it. I hope people are excited about it. Not trying, not in a braggy way, but writers are very isolated people, and we don't get a lot of wins, frankly, and
No.
we get a lot of, and we deal with a lot of negativity. And so I think every now and then it's nice to be like, hey, like I'm reflecting on like the 1 million word thing. Like, hey, I'm just realized I'm reflecting here in my office about how I published 1 million words, and I'm sharing that with are people who are literally defined as my friends on social media, right? And that's the whole point. Like, if you look at Facebook, we're friends, right? We're not. And I think that one thing I think about though is I never want to put. I think sometimes positive posts can be hurtful, and what I mean by that is I think writers perceive it as almost like a challenge, or almost as a well, why didn't all that good stuff is happening to X, why isn't it happening to me? And I always want to position positivity as this is like for everybody. This is something that that's about everyone. When horror, for example, as a genre does well, it's good for everyone in the genre. It's not just good for one person. Like if Josh Malerman as a Bird Box becomes a worldwide global phenomenon, it's good for Josh, but it's great for everybody. And if Sinners, does gangbusters on the box office and becomes a huge hit, which it did, that's good for everybody. And because it elevates horror to a new thing. And I think that what I would say is, one of the things that I won't say it bothers me or upsets me, it worries me, is I would want to make sure that people know that that when people are only talking about positive things, that's a choice. Because if I wanted to post about all the negative things that have happened to me, if I wanted to post about all the trouble that all the things that have had me crawling under the blankets and spending a day in bed in depression, or if I wanted to talk about the people that rejected me or times I thought my career was over, I could do that too. But I don't see how that's a win for anyone. I don't see how that's helping anyone, and I don't see how that's supporting anything. And so I think the last thing I'll say about this is, I'm trying not to, and I hesitate, but I'll just say it anyway, is you can't think of your other writers as opponents.
Right.
You have to think of your other writers as your peers, and as a writer, you are like I take helping other writers very, very, very seriously, because when I was coming up, I was helped by a lot of writers, and I've mentioned Larry Barron being a mentor early on, and I have mentored writers, and I know there's a lot of writers out there who have mentored people, and I think that being a victim is not necessarily the way to move forward. Thinking of yourself as a victim is not a way to progress your career or progress as a writer. And if and I have been there. I have been there. I have been in spots where I've been calling my friend and saying, like, I'm giving it all up. Nobody wants to buy my work. I can't go. I can't keep doing this. It's too heartbreaking. And and the phrase that Larry Barron, for example, used once, and I'll say it for everyone else, is the greatest virtue of any successful writer is perseverance. And that has stuck with me for a decade, because that's the one thing I always think about, is like when things start getting hard, you just got to push through. You got to put the blinders on, focus on the work, because ultimately it's all about doing the work, and all that success and stuff. All those good things will come if you just do the work. So anyway, it's kind of a long-winded, multi-pointed.
I mean, I was gonna say that we've had multiple people on here talk about similar things, because I feel like we're all admired in it, regardless of where you are in your career. Where most of us are on social media because we're trying to promote our books. We're trying to connect to other authors, connect to readers, and it's I don't know what you say about it. We are all allies.
Right.
We're all allies in this together. We're all in this together. And like you're like it almost universal. It is not universal, but most of us who are writing horror or even horror adjacent things are incredibly supportive and incredibly kind and try like Gabino Iglesias. He said this on social media once, and I've thought about it. Literally, this is years ago. He said this, and I've thought about it ever since. He's like, I have two hands. One hand, I reach up for something. I want to make my career higher, so I try to pull myself up. My other hand goes down below me and pull people up with me. And I've thought about that every day, and it exists at every level. There's people who are super successful, who have been established. They are doing that, and there's people who are just starting out who are also doing that. And I've tried to do that, and everyone I know is also doing that. I don't know. I feel like there is some misconception about, and we're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Because it's the right thing to do, and that's it, and it's also like it's just going to like if whether it's going to an event for another writer and supporting them or doing an in conversation thing, or whether it's somebody asking you like I always feel bad when I have to turn down people who ask me for blurbs because it's like there's only so much I always tell them I always reply to everybody and I'm always like look, I've got 20 novels sitting here. It's not I can't add anything to that pile, and there's only so much time in the day. But I always feel bad. I wish I could blurb everything, and I think there's guys like Clay McLeod Chapman who are like really fast readers.
Yeah, I have said this. I'm like, how does Clay read all those? Like he's
never home either. It's amazing.
He's so busy.
Almost every writer I've met has been that way, and I just think it's important. And it's I guess two things. There was definitely the hand up, hand down thing is a great way to talk about it because I am always driving. Like I'm a very driven guy, and I'm always pushing, and I've worked really hard to get where I am over like a course of over 10 years. And I think, but it's also, I know that I got here because of the support of others and the help of others and the assistance in a lot of ways. So I'm always making sure that I'm doing that for other people too. And so, I think that's huge. And I just think it's just important to say that, don't overread into people's,
happy social media,
or accomplishments, and think of it as somehow it's a negative about you because your journey is your journey, and it's if anything you should be like it's for me it's like exciting because I'm like that's something for me to reach for, that's something for me to strive for, that's something that's out there that I can grab onto. I just have to work really hard to get there. So
and keep trying, like you said earlier. It's also like you're gonna get a lot of rejections. It's gonna get lots of no's. Just got to keep going.
You got to keep going, and you do get a lot of rejections. And like I said before, it's like the two things I always tell newer writers, is like perseverance, and then also it's just when things get hard, because they will get hard. Focus on the work. Put on the blinders. Cut all that BS out, and just focus on what you're writing. And that I've done that for me multiple times over the last 10 years, and it's always saved my bacon because I'm always like, okay, well look, I can't control any of that. All I can control is like the page in front of me, the story in front of me, and I'm going to throw everything I have into that story. And that is something that I always say to writers is put on the blinders and focus on the work, because ultimately that's what it's all about anyway.
Amen. Couldn't say it better myself. Before we go, Phillip, how can people find you online? Where would you like them to go buy Sarafina and all your work?
Yeah, I'm wildly accessible. So best place is my website, which is pfracassi.com. I'm also on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram. I'm also on Blue Sky and Threads. I begin to lose track of all of them. But the big things are
there's so many.
Yeah, the big places are Facebook and Instagram and my website. That's where you get the most interaction with people. And as far as Sarafina is concerned, you can buy it anywhere. It's available. It's going to be available in the U.S. anywhere you buy books. In the U.K., it's being put out by Black Crow. Also on April 7th, so you can buy it anywhere in the U.K. Waterstones, I know, is going to be carrying it. And I'll just say, for people who are looking to buy signed copies, who will listen to this podcast, you can order through Mysterious Galaxy bookstore and in San Diego, and I will be doing an event there on April 11th, and I'll be signing all the pre-orders, so you can get a personalized or signed copy from Mysterious Galaxy.
All right. Hell yeah. Thank you, Phillip, for joining me. It was a great time.
Thank you, Robbie. I appreciate it.